In the century-long history of Walt Disney Studios, the company has slowly amassed a small but infamous group of movies that have terrified audiences, leaving unassuming children and parents with memories of so-called family films that scared and scarred them when they least expected it. Movies like The Black Hole, Return to Oz, The Black Cauldron, Fantasia, and The Watcher in the Woods have all become infamous over the decades. Their legacy is cemented by generations of viewers who can never forget the first time they laid their eyes on them, even if their box offices led to the studio perceiving them as lesser films in their catalog. And one of the most infamous members of this small group is 1983's Something Wicked This Way Comes, telling the story of two young boys terrorized by a dark carnival that comes to their small town, preying on their youth and sucking one of their fathers into their dark web. But none of this would be possible without Ray Bradbury's incredible dark fantasy novel of the same name, published in 1962 and encapsulating an even greater sense of wonder and terror. It's a story made to be a movie, but finding full life in novel form. It's a tightly focused tale of terror that draws its power from our fear of aging, death, and the unknown. And in the struggle against the darkness, we find hope. This is the story of a novel and a film that have terrified and enchanted generations. And by the pricking of my thumbs, something wicked this way comes. The seller of lightning rods arrived just ahead of the storm. He came along the street of Greentown, Illinois, in the late cloudy October day, sneaking glances over his shoulder. Somewhere not so far back, vast lightnings stomped the earth. Somewhere, a storm like a great beast with terrible teeth could not be denied. Author Ray Bradbury was born on August 22, 1920 in Waukegan, Illinois, and while he would live to be 91 years old, he knew that he wanted to be an author from the time he was very little, going on to first be published and paid for his work when he sold a joke to comedian George Burns at the age of 14, and from then on, Bradbury never stopped being one of the most prolific creators of the 20th century, making some of the most important and influential works of his time. Fahrenheit 451, The Martian Chronicles, Dandelion Wine, The Illustrated Man, countless short stories, and a variety of screenplays poured from Bradbury over the decades, with the author dedicated to writing every single day. And while it's difficult to exactly pin down Bradbury's focus as an author due to his stories ranging from science fiction to fantasy to small-town dramas, there's a current of societal critique and the internal battle of morality that flows from spiritual struggle and out into the small and big worlds shaped by the individuals that comprise them that can be found throughout his works. To me, Bradbury sits as a powerful connecting through line that links early science fiction and fantasy written around the turn of the 20th century with modern science fiction that came to prominence during the 40s and 50s. Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, Edgar Rice Burroughs, and Edgar Allan Poe are Bradbury's major inspirations, while contemporary creators like Ray Harryhausen, Robert A. Heinlein, and Arthur C. Clarke are the like-minded artists whose works of science fiction and fantasy helped to shape that generation's hearts and minds. We have art that we do not die of reality. Reality is too much with us, said Bradbury. I think we all know the basic facts of life, each of us. We know too much about death. We know too much about age. We know too much about love that sometimes fails us. People do go away. People do vanish. Friends go off over the world and never come back. Our children finally go out into the world on their own. All of us finally leave the fact of existence. Bradbury saw his works as helping his readers to confront the tensions between them and the world that they hold in check in order to create a peaceful society or a loving family or a sane life, such as anger, sadness, hatred, love, and fear, and release them in safe, healthy ways through the stories he made. So much of this is distilled down into Bradbury's fictional setting of Greentown, Illinois, which is, for all intents and purposes, his childhood home of Waukegan. Bradbury's works, including Dandelion Wine, Farewell Summer, and the short story collection Summer Morning, Summer Night, all take place in Greentown, and use the author's semi-autobiographical childhood experiences as jumping-off points for flights of fancy and fantastical terror. and it's the home and battleground of Something Wicked This Way Comes. Beginning on the night of October 23rd, Bradbury's novel follows two lifelong friends, Will Holloway, born 1 minute before the midnight of Halloween, and Jim Nightshade, born 1 minute after. Living next door to one another, the boys are two sides of the same coin, Will embodying the lightness of spring, Jim the darkness of autumn. But when they learn that a carnival is coming to town, the boys sneak out to see its nighttime arrival, only to realize that it's darkly supernatural. And soon, the seemingly normal carnival, led by Mr. Dark, sinks its roots into the outskirts of Greentown, slowly preying on its people one by one to draw strength from their fears and weaknesses. And when Will and Jim learn too much about the carnival, realizing that the strange and seemingly broken carousel at its center can grow its riders younger or older by going in reverse or forward, its ringleaders Mr. Dark and Mr. Cougar target them. And it's the simultaneous terror and attraction of the carnival and the carousel that keep Will and Jim in the orbit of Mr. Dark while drawing in Will's middle-aged father, Mr. Charles Holloway, who must become the boys' protector to keep them out of Mr. Dark's clutches. With its mid-century Midwestern setting, summer turning into autumn paralleling two young boys on the cusp of adolescence, and a dark carnival coming to town to tempt its people, Something Wicked This Way Comes is telling a classic story of good versus evil and the choices that everyone must make to decide their path forward in life. But it's a story with a small focus, a small town, just a handful of characters at the center of it, and small choices that decide the fates of individuals rather than the entire world. But Bradbury is using his fantasy to tell a very relatable and important story, one that's about the passage of time and the ways in which people can either regret what they've done in life or choose to make the most of what they have left. What I think makes Something Wicked work so well is that it approaches its horror from two opposite directions. On one side are Jim and Will, on the cusp of becoming teenagers and impatient to grow older and independent. The carnival's temptation is freedom and skipping the rest of childhood through the carousel, but the boys soon realize the true danger of Mr. Dark, the carnival's illustrated man whose lifelike tattoos come alive, and Mr. Cougar, who has been turned into an ancient husk when the boys short-circuit the carousel, turning him into the electricity-powered Mr. Electrico. Now, their temptation turns to terror, with the carnival looking to capture them and turn them into one of their physically distorted and mind-warped freaks. On the other is Charles Holloway, Will's 54-year-old father who spent most of his younger decades traveling aimlessly and without connection until falling in love and settling down. Charles is the janitor of the town's library, and although he's a well of knowledge, he's extremely distant from Will. His struggle is that he feels like he's become a father at too old of an age and can't connect with his son, so he stays at a distance. Yet he still observes Will and understands how he's changing into a man. The carnival's danger is not just to Will and Jim, but the temptation for Charles to make himself younger and stave off the fear of death. The character of Miss Foley, the boy's teacher who is mentally broken by the carnival's Hall of Mirrors and is changed into a young girl, is the tragic example of what could happen to Charles. And slowly, over the course of the novel, Charles becomes the main character of the book, fully stepping into his role as protector of Will and Jim around the midpoint. But Charles wasn't always a prominent piece of the story. Bradbury's earlier drafts in both screenplay form as well as an early first-person draft titled Jamie and Me keep the two boys squarely in focus. It doesn't seem like a coincidence then that it was around the same time as Bradbury's decision to change his rejected screenplay into a novel that his father, Leo Bradbury, passed away in the fall of 1957. And in Charles we find sorrow and tragedy, but also great wells of strength and love. Because in the end, this is the story of a son and his father finally coming to understand each other at a moment where they could either grow closer or further apart. Look at the characters of Something Wicked, and you can see elements of Bradbury spread across the people within this story. We can see Will Holloway and Jim Nightshade as the dark and light sides of Bradbury's youth, the spring and autumn hidden within each person, even from an early age. Their fascination with and maturation because of the carnival has a direct through line to Bradbury's own history, and really the entire reason for this story ever being written. In the afterword of Something Wicked, Bradbury chronicles his many young encounters with the carnival, such as his first time riding a carousel at age 4, where he screamed in terror until they stopped the ride, or his first time seeing Lon Chaney in Laugh Clown Laugh. But it was at 12 years old in 1932 when Bradbury met the real-life Mr. Electrico, sitting in an electric chair with power seemingly flowing through him, dubbing young Ray with a sword and proclaiming, "Live forever." Bradbury was immediately enraptured and returned the next day, with a kind Mr. Electrico befriending him and introducing him to the rest of the carnival freaks. It was then that Mr. Electrico told Ray that they had met before, seeing the young boy as the reincarnation of his best friend, who died in the Battle of the Ardennes Forest in 1918. Here you are with a new face, new name, but the light coming from your eyes is the soul of my lost friend. Welcome back to the world. I wandered out of the carnival, stunned, and stood by the rushing horses of the carousel, listening to the calliope wheezing "Beautiful Ohio," and wept. I knew that something amazing had struck me with electric fire and changed me forever. Within 8 weeks, I began to write. I wrote every day after that, for the next 65 years. The author attributes much of his education and writing skill to libraries in particular, rather than any formal schooling as he never went to college, with Bradbury saying, "Libraries raised me. I don't believe in colleges and universities. I believe in libraries because most students don't have any money. When I graduated from high school, it was during the Depression and we had no money. I couldn't go to college, so I went to the library 3 days a week for 10 years. So I graduated from the library when I was 28 years old." And it's no coincidence that it was at that time when Bradbury also married his lifelong wife, Marguerite. Likewise, the character of Charles Holloway spends his life within libraries, working as the janitor for Greentown's library, but choosing to hide himself away within its walls as long as he can. Charles is wise and educated, but quiet and distant. The library gives him the knowledge to understand Mr. Dark and the carnival's schemes, and even the words to warn his children, quoting Shakespeare's Macbeth to give a name to the novel.
By the pricking of my thumb, something wicked this way comes.
But despite living a life that seemed destined to make this book, it was The Martian Chronicles that set Something Wicked in motion. Movie star Gene Kelly was a huge fan of the book and wanted to meet Bradbury, who himself was a big fan of Kelly. The two soon became great friends, and Bradbury realized he wanted to write a film that would star Kelly. The idea he latched onto was based on a previous short story of his called The Black Ferris, about a dark carnival and a Ferris wheel that ages you, which he then turned into an 85-page screenplay called The Dark Carnival. Kelly loved the script, but unfortunately couldn't get any financing to produce the film, and so with the screenplay having no future, the story was returned to Bradbury, who spent the next 3 years reshaping the form and narrative to eventually be Something Wicked This Way Comes. From a literary standpoint, Bradbury's novel is truly a joy to read. The author brings this Midwest surrealist world to life with finely crafted passages that let you imagine the lush hills, the cold nights, the brilliant carnival rides, and the dangerous encounters with Mr. Dark, Mr. Electrico, and the Dust Witch, who are all given larger-than-life powers that inspire the imagination, and are something that no film can ever truly replicate. Just listen to this. This is the opening of chapter 32. At dawn, a juggernaut of thunder wheeled over the stony heavens in a spark-throwing tumult. Rain fell softly on town cupolas, chuckled from rainspouts, and spoke in strange subterranean tongues beneath the windows where Jim and Will knew fitful dreams, slipping out from one, trying another for size, but finding all cut from the same dark, molded cloth. In the rustling drumbeat, a second thing occurred. From the sodden carnival grounds, the carousel suddenly spasmed to life. Its calliope fluted up melodious streams of music. Perhaps only one person in town heard and guessed that the carousel was working again. The door to Miss Foley's house opened and shut. Her footsteps hurried away along the street. Then the rain fell hard as lightning did a crippled dance down the now totally revealed, now vanishing forever land. In Jim's house, in Will's house, as the rain nuzzled the breakfast windows, there was a lot of quiet talk, some shouting, and more quiet talk again. At 9:15, Jim shuffled out into the Sunday weather, wearing his raincoat, cap, and rubbers. He stood gazing at his roof where the giant snail track was washed away. Then he stared at Will's door to make it open. It did. Will emerged. His father's voice followed. "Want me to come along?" Will shook his head firmly. That's writing you can sink your teeth into. Given that Something Wicked was originally written to be a film, and that Bradbury only became more and more involved in screenwriting and filmmaking as the years went on, it's not too surprising that this book, which really doesn't scream feature film to me because of its highly literary and very internal perspective, was eventually adapted into a movie. But the road to the eventual feature film adaptation was even more complicated than the novel's creation. In 1972, 20th Century Fox and director Sam Peckinpah had Bradbury turn Something Wicked back into a screenplay, which initially came in at 180 pages. And yet Fox decided to not move forward with the film, releasing the rights, which were then picked up by Paramount Pictures and actor Kirk Douglas's The Bryna Company, with director Jack Clayton interested, who had previously directed the 1974 adaptation of The Great Gatsby. Bradbury cut his script down to 120 pages. And while Paramount had initially approved of producing the film, infighting between producers David Picker and Barry Diller led to the film being cancelled out of spite. And so, a film adaptation of Something Wicked languished throughout the 70s, with Bradbury writing other works like The Halloween Tree, various plays, some television scripts, and many short stories. It wasn't until 1981 that Walt Disney Pictures secured the rights to the film, approving a $16 million budget with Jack Clayton, suggested by Bradbury, still as the director. And if you think that's a lot of work to get this movie made, this is where the problems really start. After Clayton was officially hired as director, he and Disney hired screenwriter John Mortimer to rewrite Bradbury's script behind the author's back, approving it as the official shooting script with Bradbury iced out of the production. The result was a much darker, less magical film than what Bradbury had created in both his novel and screenplay. And unsurprisingly, after giving life to Something Wicked This Way Comes over and over across multiple media, only to have the vision he spearheaded for years ripped away from him at the last minute, Bradbury was rightfully pissed. I looked at his screenplay and I brought 25 suggestions to the new producer, and he took my criticisms and he threw them back at me, said Bradbury. He said, "Completely unacceptable." Bradbury says that over the next 6 months, he was on set each day warning the studio to not make the film with their new approach, but was completely ignored. And while it may not be fun to shoot a film with its original creator telling you that you suck, it turns out that good old Ray was totally right, and was proven so at the film's first screening, with the author saying, "I had my family there, all of my daughters and my wife and all of my friends, and we ran the film and it was no good. No good, no good. And the audience was dead. No applause, nobody liked it." 3 days later, and Disney called Bradbury to come in and help fix this movie. And from that moment on, Ray Bradbury was essentially the director and producer of Something Wicked This Way Comes, with Clayton pushed out of the process, but still receiving sole directing credit on the finalized film. Ray made a wide variety of changes. The narration was rewritten, the score, already composed and recorded by Georges Delrue, was thrown out in favor of a brand new score by James Horner, which is wonderful. The movie was heavily re-edited by Barry Gordon, who receives a co-editing credit alongside original editor Argyle Nelson Jr., and a lot of new scenes were shot nearly a year later, which you can see by how Jim and Will suddenly get older, and not through the magic of the carousel. We spent $5 million more with me directing it, and at the end of 6 months, we put on the new film version, and by God, the damn thing worked. The result is that the final cut of the film is a blend of Clayton's darker, more subdued approach to fantasy, and Bradbury's more overt, humanistic style, with Bradbury's work more heavily seen in the back half of the film. As for its visuals, Something Wicked's magic is largely brought to life through rotoscoping, matte paintings, and overlays. It's fun looking, but also a little cheap. The reason being that many of the scenes which incorporate these effects are placed on top of scenes that were shot without them being part of the plan. Clayton's approach to much of the magic and fantasy was to simply imply it. But when test audiences weren't connecting with the magic happening off-screen, Disney demanded that it be as overt as possible, leading to all manner of glowing pages, lightning, and magical effects to turn the quietly spiritual into the loudly magical.
For every heart, there exists a wish.
You ever play the numbers, Mr. Holloway?
Me? Never take risks.
For every soul, there burns a desire.
Completing the cycle of script to book to script, Something Wicked This Way Comes premiered on April 29th, 1983, and tells a condensed, more straightforward adaptation of Bradbury's story. Like the novel, our focus is Will Holloway, played by Vidal Peterson, Jim Nightshade, Sean Carson, and Charles Halloway, played by Jason Robards. The actor Bradbury had in mind for the part for a decade, and who's unsurprisingly great, but I think a little too old by the time the film was finally shot, who, just like the novel, are targeted by the carnival that has come to Greentown, with Mr. Dark, played by Jonathan Pryce, commanding his dark forces. All the same elements are here. Circus freaks created from past victims, the carousel that can fast forward or reverse the age of riders, and the estranged father-son relationship of Charles and Will that is healed through their struggle against the carnival. It's just that everything is more literal here. So much of the horror and danger present in Bradbury's book is caused by the internal fears and anxieties experienced by the characters. The danger of the carnival and Mr. Dark is that they seem to innately know the fears within our characters' minds and prey upon them in order to exploit them. The strained father-son relationship in the Holloway family is not because of any one specific incident, but because of Charles' internal grief and sadness over his age and inability to relate to his son, who stands as a sort of idealized version of the youth that Charles missed out on. That's really hard to pull off well and clearly within a 90-minute movie aimed at a younger audience. So a lot of those hypothetical and metaphorical fears of the book are turned into literal forms within the movie. Many of the townspeople, who are given more time here than in the book so as to establish the true danger of the carnival, are given very specific regrets and desires within their lives, so as to have the carnival target them with the carousel. Loss of limb that prevents being a baseball player, a long-gone youth as a beautiful girl. Reclaiming these lost prizes of youth is the incentive that draws them into the carnival's web. Likewise, the struggles of our three main characters are much more literal here too. Charles' grief as a father is revealed to be caused by an incident years earlier where Will fell into a river and Charles was frozen by his fear, with Jim's father rescuing young Will and causing Charles to struggle with his own guilt and inaction in the years that followed. Will and Jim are in much more direct physical danger too. Rather than the witch marking their house with snail slime in a hot air balloon, their beds are filled with spiders. They're frequently stalked and chased through the night by the carnival's minions. It's the type of more direct physical horror that's much easier for children to be scared by. And it completely makes sense as to why so many people over the years have cited the film as the scariest thing they saw as a kid. There's all manner of deeply disturbing moments throughout the movie that either adapt the book or are brand new, like Will seeing a replica of himself beheaded, complete with bloody stump, or young Miss Foley suddenly going blind, or Mr. Dark digging his nails into his palms until blood falls on Will hiding below. It's the type of moments that will burn themselves into a young viewer's brains if seen at the right age. And of course, since the film was released in 1983, 1 year before the creation of the PG-13 rating, Something Wicked was rated with only a PG, meaning that the audience age range was wide open. And with the Disney branding, plenty of families walked into what they expected to be a light-hearted Halloween film, only to witness a deeply dark one. It also means that the ideas are simpler, less resonant to adults, and don't have as much impact as the novel. And the same goes for the film's climax. Like the novel, Charles is trapped in the Hall of Mirrors and confronted with his reflected fears. But the struggle is much more literal, with the captured and tortured lightning rod salesman breaking free to destroy the mirrors and kill the Dust Witch. And rather than Charles destroying Mr. Dark with a display of love and affection, it's a more straightforward fight aboard the out-of-control carousel, with Dark trapped and being aged into a withered husk, with really cool special effects done by Stan Winston Studios. Hey, it's like I planned out all these videos months ago. What do you know? But what Clayton's film is most effective at is creating a sense of growing darkness that feels very much like a child's nightmare coming to life, and slowly warping reality around them. Cinematographer Stephen H. Burham does some great work here. It should be noted that Something Wicked was made when things were looking pretty bad for Disney. In fact, the studio didn't have enough lights and generators on set that were needed for a largely night set shoot on very, very large sound stages. And this was also before the invention of high-speed, low-light film, which meant they needed a lot of light to make this movie look good and look legible during its night sets. The result was a studio left scrambling to get new lights and new equipment and new generators to make this movie possible, as it was slowly growing much bigger than they ever anticipated. And if you look at the other Disney films released around the same time, you can see that it was dire straits for the House of Mouse. Something Wicked is bookended by the releases of The Fox and the Hound, which did fine, and The Black Cauldron, which nearly killed the animation division. In live action, you've got lots of Herbie movies, The Black Hole, Condor Man, Tron, and Return to Oz. Films I find fascinating for the most part, but that failed to gain the tickets the company really needed. Unfortunately, Something Wicked disappointed at the box office upon release on April 29, 1983, only making $8.4 million against a budget that had inflated to $20 million due to reshoots. And while it's become a cult classic in the decades since because of its fright spreading through the following generations, thanks to airings on TV and cable and VHS releases, Disney slowly let the film drift from their focus. A bare-bones DVD release, not available on Blu-ray until 2021 as a Disney Movie Club exclusive, which has since gone defunct, not available to buy or rent digitally at all, and not included in the massive Disney Plus catalog until just this month. Why has it been mostly unavailable for so long? It's not a rights issue, but seems to be a matter of Disney simply not finding the film to be a priority. But now, with the manufactured scarcity, Disney's model for decades with Vault, its release on streaming can be an event that draws new eyes. Hopefully, this means that new generations will be drawn into Bradbury's works and find not only new terrors, but new dreams. But most of all, Bradbury's novel lacks the seemingly permanent childhood that so much of Disney seems to encourage. In fact, it fights against it. Something Wicked This Way Comes scares us because the unstoppable nature of time and age is far more real than any witch, or Mr. Electrico, or Dark Carnival, or Carousel that makes you old. And by the end of the novel, Will and Jim have aged several years because of their fight to stop the carousel, and now there's no turning the clock back. And yet, Will and his father have finally connected and understand one another. Oh, Dad, you did it! You did it! No, we did it together. But without you, it'd be all over. Oh, Dad, I never knew you. I sure know you now. Do you, Will? Darn right. Each to the other shimmered in bright halos of wet light. Why then, hello, reply, son, and curtsy. Dad held out his hand. Will shook it. Both laughed and wiped their eyes. And in the realization that it's only the fear of death that holds us back and not death itself, that age does not limit us but only our thoughts, Charles chooses to live again. The loving, kind, youthful parent that we all wish for. The father that finally lets his son understand him. Dashing off into a new day. And while it's hinted at that Will and Jim may one day grow apart, that the temptation of the carousel will never truly be gone, today is not that day. Perhaps the boys slowed. They never knew. Perhaps Charles Holloway quickened his pace. He could not say. But running even with the boys, the middle-aged man reached out. Will slapped. Jim slapped. Dad slapped the semaphore signal base at the same instant. Exultant, they banged a trio of shouts down the wind. Then, as the moon watched, the three of them together left the wilderness behind and walked into town. As for each of us, we all have a choice to make. Live in fear and let life pass us by, or acknowledge that everything we are, everything we've lived, can be taken with us as we shape a new, better life. Part of me is still on that hideous carousel when I was 4, said Bradbury. I seem never to have found a way to get off. Thanks for watching today's video, and we're on to the next entry in my Halloween series. Something Wicked This Way Comes is one of those dark Disney movies that you hear a lot of people talk about around Halloween, but it's still something that isn't given the attention and praise that it really should. at least when it comes to the movie. Ray Bradbury's novel, on the other hand, is a classic of modern literature, but is often not talked about when people talk about the film. So when I was putting together my ideas for Halloween this year, I realized that I really wanted to talk about this story and talk about both sides of it. So if you've only read the book, now maybe you're more interested in watching the movie. And if you've only seen the movie, maybe you're more interested in reading the book. Or maybe you've done both, and this has just been a fun watch for you. The funny thing is that I picked this idea and started writing this video before it was officially announced that Something Wicked was finally coming to Disney+. But this happens a lot to me. Just call it tapping into the zeitgeist. Rewatching this movie and reading the book has been a real joy for me, and it has made this one of my favorite novels that I've read in recent years. It's an absolute classic, and Bradbury's writing is just so wonderful to sink into. And the movie, I totally understand, is a classic of scaring kids when they're young, but it does have some weaknesses, especially when compared to the novel. And in knowing the whole production backstory of the film, I totally get why it does have those weaknesses. Really, it's a minor miracle that it's as good as it really is. Over the last several years, I've done a series of videos on obscure and kind of forgotten Disney films that people seem to really enjoy. So you can lump this into the same category as my videos on Tron and Tron Legacy, Tron Uprising, The Black Hole, and my various videos covering different eras of Disney where the company really struggled. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Something Wicked This Way Comes, both the book and the movie, maybe your favorite Bradbury stories, and any other favorite, more obscure, family-friendly horror films. As always, a huge thank you to my patrons and members for their continued support, and if you'd like to be a patron or member, it's only $2 a month for early access to every video and exclusive reviews, with multiple exclusive reviews happening during October for the Halloween season. So until next time, I hope that you're taking care of yourselves and having a happy Halloween.